Okay, welcome back. It is late September 1864 then, and it's been a good start to the war so far. The feint in the east appears to have kind of had the desired results, really. We're looking at large Austrian concentrations in Romania, with what would probably be a large part of their field command, maybe nearly half of their entire field command, concentrated either in Bucharest or Moldavia. And yeah, that's exactly what we're looking to do. We've really effectively, using really a combination of railroads and our heavy lift transport fleet, we managed to get our Western Strike team assembled very, very quickly in Salonika. It's two armies, of course. Over the last month, we've kind of force-marched this army north to Zvornik and ultimately into Sarajevo. They're in relatively good shape. A lot of that is because they're marching in quite clement weather. And even though we're in late September, if we look at the weather between, for example, Sava, you can always see the weather indicated down here. The weather is still clear. And this is very encouraging. And this means that we have nothing that we can see between our western sort of field command in Sarajevo and Vienna. And our plan then was always to conduct a thunder run to Vienna, go for a headshot. To that end, we're going to do that. Offensive posture, all-out attack. Hussein Avni is a fast mover, and if there is no significant engagements, he'll be there in 10 days. There's a good chance it might be 12 or 13. But yeah, we're going to follow him. Both of these commands are activated with Mehmed Ali. He's not a natural fast mover, although Mehmed Ali does have abilities in his own right. He's got a 70% chance to force march. We're going to push for that. Assault posture, attack at all costs. If the force march is successful, it'll be 15 days. At the very least, however, he'll be located in Buda in Western Hungary, and that's fine also because they can support each other. So that's pretty much it. That's the headshot that we're going to go for. The idea is to take Vienna really between now and sort of late October to move as quickly as we can. The Russians have conducted a landing at Fiume. That's interesting. That could upset our plans a little bit, but I think it's too little, too late to really change the main disposition of Austrian forces. The Austrians don't have much in the way of railroads in the eastern part of their country. It's the least developed part of their country. That might be why they've often suffered supply difficulties with large forces, although that doesn't appear to be the case now. But whatever the weather, these forces would have to conduct a fairly extended march through quite mountainous terrain. Okay, the weather's still quite good also, actually, in the Eastern Austrian Empire, but in order, they have to really get to Hungary before they can get that sort of railroad access for rapid strategic redeployment. Furthermore, it looks like Russian forces have penetrated, probably raiding cavalry forces, Cossacks, this kind of thing, but they've torn up some railroads in Slovakia. So this could be really interesting. And the fact that the Austrians have done quite well against the Russians also rather plays into our hands, because it rather suggests that a large part of Austrian forces, probably the remainder of their significant field command, is probably now in Western Ukraine or Poland or Belarus. So again, very encouraging. So yeah, fingers and sort of toes crossed firmly, really, for the thunder run. But if it comes off, it will be sensational. The risks are far less acute in this war than in the last one, because of course we have significant British forces that also have accompanied us to Sarajevo. That to some extent kind of controls the rear, and it means that we're much more likely to get out of a sticky situation if this goes south, and there's always a chance that it might. We don't know what the Austrians, for all we know, they've got 300, they could easily have 300,000 men or large forces being assembled at Vienna. We don't know that they don't. So it is rolling the dice, but the stakes, I don't think we'd lose these commands entirely, but if problems arise, we can probably get them back, and there's large British forces holding the rear. My thinking is the Austrian response is probably going to be to conduct offensives towards Niš, Pristina, Zvornik. They have reasonable, we don't know quite what these forces are, the character of these forces, but they have at least 3 regular formations in the field outside Belgrade, plus they have some other forces inside the city itself. That could easily be 50,000 men, 50, 60,000 men, and my thinking is they'll probably try and pinch off our position in Bosnia. Well, we're going to conduct a move to counter that. Now, first of all, we can draw on the depot in Sarajevo. Plus, once we capture Vienna, assuming that we do, we're capturing a fairly significant city, which also has a depot. So, for a fairly decent period of time, our force, okay, it's going to be, both of these forces is going to be like 170,000 men, and an army that large, or a force that large, will work through supplies relatively quickly. But I think being able to draw supplies from Sarajevo, plus the supplies which would naturally assemble in a large city like, for example, West Budapest and Vienna, that looks good to supply those forces, even if they become isolated for a period of time. In addition to that, we're also now going to conduct a landing with a portion of Bayezid Pasha's forces assembled at Constantinople. So we've got an additional army corps. We're going to put that into this force. And we have the transport fleet. So, in fact, we're not going to do it just yet. No, what have I done? Okay, so let's give Abdi Pasha the second commander. There's actually 2 guard corps. So this is an especially effective force. There's an infantry corps also, which is almost completed assembly at Bursa. That'll join them later on. And we'll need to build a cavalry division or 2 as well. But this force should be kind of good enough, I think. Okay, so it's in the transport fleet. We're going to conduct a landing at Spalato. 18 days. That's a shame. That's longer than I would have liked, but okay. Okay. And that's prepared. And the purpose of that also is to try and deal with Austrian forces here. So we'll see Spalato. That is a victory location. That's a fairly significant city on the Dalmatian coast. You know, the Austrians consider this the part of their interior, you know. Even though, obviously, I suppose this is a Croatian-speaking region in the empire. This traps Austrian forces at Cattaro. We'll move down, seize Cattaro, and then we'll look to move this force north. We'll probably liberate Montenegro as well, because why not? And yeah, we'll march this force north. It will be joined then by a cavalry division and an additional guard corps, which will be deposited at Spalato. And we'll fuse those forces at Bihać, and we'll then look to march north, probably besiege Trieste, but also open up lines of communication between Bosnia and our army that'll be in Vienna. So we'll look to take Zagreb, Marburg, clear this area really, clear the sort of southern Austrian area, and then conduct a siege at Trieste. That's pretty much the plan, and so far it looks like the stars are aligning in just the way that we wanted them, and the fact that both of these commands at Sarajevo are activated this term is an absolute godsend. And despite having conducted a fairly extended march all the way from Salonika, they're in relatively good shape. You know, a lot of that is because they arrived at Sarajevo during the last turn transition on like day 2 or 3 or 4, something like that. So they've been sitting tight for a good 10 days anyway, you know, getting their troops rested and reorganized and getting a bit of leave and stuff like that. So they're in relatively good shape for the most part. So the hope is that this comes off, and if it does, it'll be, I mean, it's incredible to think that if this comes off, to think that we spent the last war with Austria fighting for 3 years at an incredible cost, all, you know, really mostly centered around Bulgaria. We could never retake Constanța or Sarajevo, but we could inflict stinging defeats on the Austrians in the field, but we were principally fighting a defensive war. To think that we can transition from that to this, if this happens, is just incredible to think, really. What we are going to do, actually, also, is move the main Imperial fleet down, just to secure the sea zone in the Central Adriatic. And then, probably next turn, so transitioning from late September into early October, we'll use the fleet to conduct a short bombardment at Spalato, soften up the defences, and that should sort of prepare the ground for a landing. Bear in mind, landings in the 1860s, it's not like D-Day or anything like that. You know, you're really landing forces often out of view of the enemy on a portion of the coast, you know, and trying to get, you know, your force sort of unloaded, form a bridgehead. I mean, there's obviously similarities to any kind of amphibious landing during any period, but they're not going to be landing in Higgins craft under fire or anything like that. That's pretty much it. That's our moves made. Now we've got infantry corps being assembled in Bursa. We need a cavalry division. Okay, good. That's what I'm talking about, spending money during war. You do this sort of all the time, really. And then you kind of think, you know, war's not too bad, you know. We've been fighting a war, the economy's still growing, but it just grows at a much slower rate. That said, the growth of our economy is so fast that even at a slower rate, I think we're probably outpacing a lot of our competitors. And it's an interesting feature that even during economic crises in the 19th century, because it's a much more dynamic period in terms of the growth of the productive forces, really economic crises express themselves in a slowing down in the development of kind of, you know, the development of the productive forces, a slowing down of economic growth as opposed to kind of economic contraction or anything like that. That said, we've only had 2 economic crises so far, and I think for the most part they've been relatively mild. We've managed to weather those fairly effectively. So that's pretty much it. There's nothing else to really kind of do. We've played all the colonial cards that we want to play for the time being in the Yemen. Yeah, I think there's nothing else that we can do. We need to try and get down and supply. What can we do here? $40 and $40 plus 5 manufactured goods. Let's go with the road network. In there. And we also had a bit of colonial fort, I think. Then 30%. We need an average colonial. So the way that it works is to have the colonial penetration threshold. It's worked out on the basis of an average. So in the kind of provinces, if you like, the outlying areas of the Hejaz, we want an average colonial penetration of around 40, I believe, for formal colonial status. In some areas, we're almost there, 38%, for example. We're, for the most part, 40 in some areas. We're not quite there yet, and I think the colonial penetration in Medina... Well, I'll tell you what, we don't need to speculate too much. Let's hover over. Formal colony, 4 turns left, and it goes through the criteria of what's sort of required. Must target a colonial so the colonial capital has 50 to 100%, which is fine because the colonial capital is Medina, and that's sitting at 55. Yeah, and an average colonial penetration throughout the rest of the region. Because the Hejaz is larger, so the larger the region, you know, the more complex it is, the more kind of the more moving parts there are in terms of achieving the required threshold for sort of formal colonial status. One interesting thing is that formal colonial status, especially in a region as large as Hejaz, expresses itself in a big short-term boon in terms of state revenue. And that's really because the finances of this region become properly integrated into your treasury. At the moment, it's a protectorate. So it's kind of, you know, it is an Ottoman territory. It's recognized as within the Ottoman sphere of influence, but it's heavily decentralized. There's local rulers. You can see even outside Medina, we don't have real military control outside the city. So it's a kind of very decentralized and somewhat tenuous form of kind of control. Colonial status integrates it completely. Instead of having local tribal leaders that are maybe on your payroll, or maybe they have Ottoman minders that are kind of pulling wires. No, in actual fact, the colonial status would be just a governor or a viceroy, you know, an administrator, a bureaucrat. And it wouldn't be necessary to have local tribal leaders anymore on your side or anything like that. I mean, they might still constitute a part of the local government, but it's a secondary, you know, they become a second tier, really, in terms of government. And that's really what we're moving to in Q8, which is really, really good. Now, economic administration for the turn has been set. Exports have been set. In terms of economic feedback, another really good round for exports. Ironically, a lot of that is because of the war and because Austria is actually isolated. So Austria's, funny enough, become rather dependent on us for imports. And again, I mean, you can trade with kind of foes. This happens in warfare anyway, and I suppose increasingly it's done through third parties, you know. But the Austrians, because a lot of their productive forces are destroyed in the First War, they're the kind of private wealth that they get, the private capital they get, a large part of that is devoted in bringing in the kind of necessary manufactured goods and commodities to keep their population sated and happy. So they're kind of caught in a bit of a vicious cycle, really. This means that the money that's generated through domestic market sales, a large part of that is needed to import. Because, of course, the population of the Austrian Empire has a certain kind of standard of life that they've become used to. You know, a sudden drop in that would probably result in serious civil disorder problems of the empire falling apart. So they're kind of locked in this, you know, it means that they're really struggling to, I mean, you know, they do occasionally build railroads and they have built some mines and things like this. I mean, they've recovered a lot of the mines. In fact, I don't think we ever took, I'm not sure if we ever took Maren. We took Prague, and they rebuilt the gems field in Prague, but we have seen a resurrection anyway of some of the productive forces, but it's relatively slow. If you consider that I think we've devastated much of the country about 7 years ago, you know. It's mad to think that it was only 7 years ago. It feels like an eternity, but it's, I suppose when a lot happens in a short period of time, you know, it has the effect of kind of compressing time. Or the opposite, not so compressing time, I don't know. That's what I'm talking about. But anyway, I think that's it for late September. Economic admin is done. I'm always kind of thinking, let me just double check economic admin. I'm always thinking about things that I might have missed or forgotten. It is a pretty good game like that. It's not the kind of game that if you forget one thing in one turn, it's going to be really catastrophic or anything like that. As long as you always press B at the very least, check your assets balance and make sure that kind of domestic demand is being met. There's none of these boxes are glowing red or anything like that. Always keep an eye on inflation. I think a lot of players have noticed. I mean, I'm playing a multiplayer game at the moment and just took over a power. It's a very long campaign and inflation was unbelievably high. And I thought that maybe there was a global economic crisis, but I think it was just the player probably didn't know how to manage it or something. But yeah, so anyway, heads up. Keep an eye on your inflation. Keep it as low as possible. I always say between 0 and 2% is acceptable levels of inflation. Once it starts climbing, 3%, okay, you can look the other way. But like once you start getting inflation, just try and keep it down. It just reduces your cost. It allows also your treasury, you know, your state apparatus to just punch above its weight in terms of what it can afford, what it can do. So it's worth doing. It really is worth. It's one of those things you need to keep an eye on, and it's something that has long-term detrimental effects as well. It does. It makes your economy really, really sluggish because it just makes everything more expensive. It's inflation. It does what it, you know, what sort of is to be expected. So you have inflation kind of in other games like European Universalis. I think the old, they're only playing the new ones, but the old one, number 2, I think, European Universalis 2, that kind of had inflation, which was reasonably well modelled, but it was something that would have, you know, impacts over maybe hundreds of years, really. But anyway, yeah, I'd say in this game it's a little bit more zero sum. That's it. I'm going to pass the turn, put you on pause, and we'll see you on the other side in early October. Okay, welcome back then, early October, and let's see how the Thunder Run went. So they were just set to defensive posture. They weren't set to assault positions or anything like that. So they moved through Western Hungary, and I mean, it was a successful march. They weren't engaged by the looks of it. Any Austrian forces that were in their way simply, they just withdrew, they retreated because they were overwhelmed by the kind of numbers that we pushed through, and by the looks of it, it's good. It's really good. Now, there are fairly substantial Austrian forces to the north, although it looks like they're kind of blocked by Russian forces that are sitting on the north bank of the Danube. So this looks like a Russian raiding force. Yeah, in terms of what's actually in Vienna, it looks like a bunch of supply units, rear echelon stuff, basically with just generic garrisons. Yeah, I think kind of job done, really. We're going to set to Hussein Avenue to assault Vienna. Push at all costs. We keep Mamadadi in a supporting role for the time being. His force did conduct a force march, so it's a little bit worse for wear. But there's no reason why they shouldn't come off. The Austrian forces around Vienna that we can see are very modest indeed. Probably with the exception of the force to the north at Marin or Olmutz. But that's only really a couple of army corps. What looks like a Landwehr infantry division. Yeah, some support detachments, supply trains, and just a group of support detachments, really. Was it 53rd Troop, 3 units? There's maybe a few corps to the north, but they don't look like they're in good shape. Maybe they look like they're being patched up from sort of battle damage on the eastern front with the Russians, but I don't think they're in a position to move. They're not in a position to move and counter our kind of hold in the district around Vienna. So yeah, I think we're going to be free to conduct an offensive, an assault on Vienna. Vienna's not fortified, of course. It's no longer a frontier city. So yeah, save for some kind of miracle that's going to save it, I think between now and late October, Vienna will fall again to the Ottoman Empire, the second time in the 19th century and the second time in its history, this time to Hussein Avni Pasha. And yeah, a welcome development. If it comes off, you know, we shouldn't count our kind of chickens or eggs, is it? I don't know. Chickens, eggs, something hatch. 2 days then from the landing at Spalato, we have got the main fleet in place now. We're going to conduct a shore bombardment of Spalato. And yeah, look to really then kind of deal with the Austrian forces on the Dalmatian coastline. We should take Spalato fairly quickly, move south, deal with the force at Cartero, liberate Montenegro. We will be compelled legally to withdraw our forces from Montenegro relatively quickly, but then we'll look to push north and yeah, begin to assemble really. This force is only an ad hoc force, of course, that we're landing. It's kind of comprised of 2 army corps plus a load of support surface asset units and some independent artillery. So we need to get an additional infantry corps plus a cavalry division now that this infantry corps in Bursa is finished. Let's get this force to Smyrna, I think. The cavalry division that we began construction is not complete. Now the cavalry divisions in Plevna were receiving replacements. We actually subtracted them from our force, put them into the inside the fortress to receive replacements. They can actually rejoin their commands now. They're in good shape. Why has that happened? Be normal, game. Just be normal. No, it just won't let me do that. Okay. You've ever seen that one? That is the first time I've ever seen that. I can't, for whatever reason. Can't fuse these units. Trying to think why, whether I've done something silly that I can't think of. Okay, well I'm not going to overthink this too much and then we'll just leave them. Maybe there's something I'm missing. They're the two cavalry divisions, I believe. Yeah, that one's not a problem. But it's not a bug then, it's something to do with this. I don't know what it is. We'll leave them in there for now. Maybe I'm something I'm missing. Maybe there is sort of a... I mean, when the game kind of passes turn, it is a turn-based game, but things kind of can still be happening. Maybe it happened, you know, the turn ended on day 15 with some replacement still being pushed into the unit or something like that. I don't know, which means that it can't sort of... It basically can't function for some reason, but that's okay. Now, we've got two commands that are actually activated. It looks like the Austrians have pushed into Constanta. That's fine. Now, Constanta has been prepared for a long time for a very big siege. And we have 93,000 men in Constanta. Yeah. We've got 36 elements in a region structure with a safe limit of 75. Yep, we expanded and modernized the fortress. So, yeah, bring it on. In the meantime, we're going to conduct a push north. 2 days. Yeah, something deeply weird is happening. I can't quite figure out what. Okay. And we're going to conduct a dual assault against Bucharest. Yeah, 2 days of peace. Great stuff. And we'll keep Rita Pasha in the south. He can support Bucharest anyway if it's countered. But yeah. I think that's pretty much it. So the assault on Vienna begins then. The headshot. And we now begin to put some real pressure on their position in the east. I don't think that they'll be an assault and take Constanta. So their only option, I mean, they have got more open lines of communication to the north now because they've taken Podolia and Bessarabia. So they can fall back into Russian territory that they control. But once Vienna goes, I don't know what kind of, you know, what's the quality of this force going to be. The hope is that it precipitates a kind of national morale collapse, similar to something that we saw in the First War. We shall see. So this turn then, the landing at Spalato, the assault on Vienna, plus an assault by two armies on Bucharest. It's a lively beginning to the war. And that is pretty much it. In terms of our kind of combat moves, that is it. Now, one thing that we're starting to do economically, just in the background, is they're not kind of strategic railroads, they're economic ones. Is we're building railroads in these Greek islands. The railroads are really designed just to kind of cater for these vineyards. You know, wine is a really good, lucrative kind of manufactured good, and we want to look to become an exporter. We do have railroads going through some vineyards in Lebanon, but for the most part in the rest of the Ottoman Empire, areas that have kind of naturally occurring fruit production, we just have fruit plantations. I might look at some point to deconstruct the fruit plantation at Salonika and turn that into a vineyard. But we're going to look to drive up the production of wine with some investments, infrastructure investments in these Greek islands. So these are very localized railways. I tell you what, we're not going to do that yet. I know what we are going to do. I just remembered something. So we have protectorate status in Zanzibar, and Zanzibar has access to opium. And we are looking to establish ourselves as a big opium producer. That's good. That leaves us with ample resources. And we're going to be looking to develop Mogadishu on the same line, as this Mogadishu has the ability to grow opium, plus there's plenty of local opium in Yemen. And with all of these regions, once we've got like railroad access and these regions are being properly developed, and once you've got, I mean, we're going to be looking at it being a serious, like the principal opium producer on earth. And that's good stuff. I mean, that's a really lucrative commodity that we can export for good money. We already have one opium plantation in Bursa with railroad access. It's just churning out 4 units per turn. The game's doing this weird thing where it suddenly becomes really slow and sluggish for no apparent reason. But anyway, let's look through the rest of the reports. Good round on exports again. A lot of that going north into Austria. I suppose Austria is dependent on us and Prussia really, just to feed itself and to kind of meet its to meet its kind of sort of domestic demands. 192 units exported for 614. So we're not selling less goods on the domestic market, but we are seeing a fall in terms of the revenue it generates, private revenue. Wonder why that is. It might just be price fluctuation. Exports are climbing though. 394, that's really good. Imports staying the same. We did cut off steel imports. We pushed for 20 units back in September. I think it was early September, late August, just to make up the shortfall of our own production. In terms of steel, we churn out like 10 units per turn, I think. Yeah, just over. So we have a steel smelt in, I think it's an Ankara or Sinop, I can't remember. Yeah, Ankara. Steel furnace. So there's 9 there. And I think something else produces steel. Some of the armaments factories produce residual steel. It's not their main kind of commodity, but they produce steel as a part of their manufacturing process, which is interesting, but yeah. Right, let's look through the other reports. Three turns left for Q8 to become a formal colony. That's everything then. Admin has been set. I'm just going to check the Foreign Ministry Bureau just to make sure that nothing has been sent to note. Nothing has. Sometimes you can miss the report, you know. So I tend to always check that. Good relations with the British. Relations with Britain and France are climbing. That's good to see. Manufacturing goods are good. Let's quickly just check exports again. Yeah, that's all fine. Now, one really good thing about dismembering the Austrian Empire is, again, it's not just it's like an abstract, just a political thing. It will actually pay dividends. The idea is if we can create like a Hungary, which I think includes Transylvania, it's like quite large, and then maybe later a Croatia. These places, when they become independent, have very good relations with us, and us alone, they have like plus 50 relations, very warm relations. that gives us a lot of elbow room in terms of arrangements that we can arrive at. They won't have any claims on our territory or anything like that either, I don't think. Like Hungary won't have claims on, for example, Bosnia. Maybe Croatia will, but I'm not sure. But that straight away leaves us open, for example, to secure a commerce agreement with them. That means that for the most part, they're going to be basically importing from us and us alone. And we can turn them into like an economic playground. We can look at the kind of commodity access, for example, in a place like Hungary, see these resources. We can build the RGOs. They won't be Hungarians, they'll be Ottoman RGOs. We will develop the Hungarian economy, and it'll basically be controlled by us. That's the idea. So, for example, Hungary, depending where its borders lie, could have really good access to timber. And that is something that we lack in our economy. Really good cereals production as well. So, yeah, dicing the Austrian Empire up. You know, we don't have claims or anything like that, but the idea is we turn it into a bit of a kind of economic playground, a place that we can exploit and develop. And, yeah, it could be really exciting if it comes off. Cattle herding, also minerals. I mean, Hungary's really flat. It's good agricultural sort of territory, but it's in terms of coal production, there's not too much in the south. I mean, if Hungary includes all of this, this leaves Bucharest isolated. We could also push maybe for an additional independent Romanian principality. We might do that, but you know, the more that we try to, you know, the higher the bar that we set in terms of what we want to create, the longer we're going to have to occupy central Austria. We're going to remember is even if we've got a lot of kind of points in terms of the conference table, if we leave it a year and then someone else declares war on us, that does change the strategic balance of forces. The AI takes note of that. They're less likely to offer something so generous. So, you know, we might be able to secure Hungary, but they may not accept that once we are at war with Russia or something like this. It's a thing we have to keep it sort of, you know. And once we I think once we get Hungary broken away, we can kind of chop them up piece by piece. You know, we don't have to do it all in one war. And it should weaken them sufficiently, I think. An independent Hungary will weaken them sufficiently. It also mean that a future war would probably be fought in Hungary, because we would guarantee Hungarian independence, sort of thing. That's the thinking, anyway. That's it for this term. I'm going to pass the turn, then put you on pause. It's early October, so see you on the other side in late October. Okay, we passed turn. We are in late October, and it's been a sensational round. So let's have a look at what's happened. Well, first of all, before we go through the battle reports, we can see it is a story of overwhelming success. Vienna has fallen to the Ottoman Empire for the second time in its history. The second time there was late October 1864, led by Hussein Avni Pasha, and yeah, I mean, you love to see it. You know, it's yeah, a great outcome. We're definitely, you know, it's not all plain sailing from here onwards. There are a few problems which we'll look at, but Austrian forces have already begun to assemble to the north under von Schwarzburg, and to the east under von Klein-Gala. So, yeah, and also supplies are not looking great at all. Supplies, we work for our own kind of integrated supply trains much quicker than I thought we would, but there is some integral supply in Vienna which we had to draw from, but that's also less than I imagined it would be. A little bit less, anyway. No, it's a lot less. So, yeah, we need to think very quickly about how we're going to open up a sort of supply corridor to Vienna. The other part then, I mean, we consider the landing was successful at Dalmatia. We defeated the Austrian forces there, a bit of a fight, but yeah, I suppose then it leaves kind of Bayezid as the only candidate that's in a position to try and open up some kind of land corridor. Problem is, as soon as he does that, I mean, he could move through Bihać and then Zagreb, but as soon as he leaves his right flank open, you've got Karl Ferdinand's corps going to probably move in and disrupt the situation. The good thing is that Sarajevo is guarded by the British, at least for now anyway. He's activated 6 days, 11 days, 16. Problem is, if he simply passes through these territories, it won't be enough. He needs to kind of hold them. Yeah, anyway, we'll think about that in a moment. The other offensive then was in the east. This initially started off at the very beginning as a kind of as a feint, but now we are actually prosecuting a meaningful offensive, and we have taken Bucharest. I think it's the first time that we've actually successfully taken Bucharest. We pressed across the Danube, we assaulted the city, and it's in the bag. The Austrians are continuing to besiege Constanza, but they have broken some forces north by the looks of it. And the combat value of their forces is significantly reduced also, probably on account of the morale collapse that has been caused by the fall of Vienna. That's pretty much it then. For a more detailed look through the kind of combat reports. So on day 1, we get the first part of the assault, or the beginning of the assault of Vienna. We take just under 2,000 casualties, we inflict 6,500, plus we take 3,000 something prisoners. So that's the first day of the assault, and that's a 2-round action. Day 2 then, they continue to press the assault, inflict another 6,000 casualties, take another 3,000 prisoners, this time only lose 600 men. So they're just kind of battering the fortress down. On day 2 also is when our boys arrive in Bucharest. They pretty much take Bucharest in one fell swoop with only like 4,000 or just, no, in fact just over 3,000 casualties. And they destroy the garrison completely. So yeah, sensational stuff. So Bucharest is in the bag already by day 2. Day 3 then is the continued assault against Vienna. We inflict 400 casualties this time, but 4 elements are destroyed. So these elements are obviously under strength. Plus we take 1,200 prisoners, we lose 300 men. So day 3, you see, rolling up a lot of forces, but it's not over yet. Day 5. So I guess on day 4 is a kind of day of rest and reorganization. Hussein Avni conducts a continued assault. This time, it looks like there are Austrian forces that have been moved in to Vienna, an attempt to relieve Vienna, and it's not successful. We inflict 23,000 casualties. There are still fortress or garrison forces. I'm not sure if they've been pushed out of the city by then or not, but we lose 10,000 men and inflict 23,000. From there on, there are no further engagement, so I think by then Vienna is already taken. It looks like the forces that remain outside are actually just, they're a mixture of kind of regular forces that have been pushed in. It's Bezak's corps, plus just fortress troops that have been pushed out of the city, basically. So we'll look to mop up the district. We have got a nice defensive line, at least on the Danube, against these Austrian attacks, and it looks like the attacks are, for the most part, going to come from the north. That said, they've brought in some army corps into Buda as well. It's going to be a lively sort of month in Vienna, I think. And these guys are going to work through their supplies and ammunition very quickly, so it might have been that we overlooked the importance of supply in this case. But we want to try and hold this position as long as we can. That's it then. That's all the combat reports. In fact, that's not it, is it? There's additional action at Bucharest. I think this is mopping up. No, that is the Battle of Bucharest. It's already been shown. Oh, okay, yeah, they're landing at Spalato then. And that looks like it's pretty much in the bag straight away also. Yeah, we lose 700,000 men, inflict 3,200, take 1,600 prisoners. And in fact, that's a 2-stage action. So the next action then is on day 9. And yeah, that looks like it engages the kind of, what was a fairly substantial Austrian force, 9,700 men, and it absolutely devastates them. Inflicts just under 50,000 casualties. We take 12,000, take 8,000 prisoners, destroy 5 elements. So that's good stuff. That might have actually been an attempt by Karl Ferdinand to push through. Now what has happened is the Austrians have managed to move forces in, and they're besieging the Russians at Fiume. The Russians got a fairly large force in there. Fairly mixed forces, but yeah, the Austrians have trapped them into the city and they're besieging them. We need to have a bit of a think about what to do from here, because we need to try and make the most of the situation. We do need to try and open up a land corridor to our forces in Vienna kind of forthwith. So yeah, we need to have a think about what to do. So I'm probably going to leave the video here, but that's basically the action for late October 1864. And I mean, whatever happens from now on, we can definitely say that the plan was a good plan. But yeah, can we hold? What's the supply situation going to be? The supply that's contained within the units is diminished, but they should be able to draw on what's in Vienna, which again is less than I thought it would be, frankly. But anyway. So yeah, where do we go from here? I mean, basically we have to hold central Austria and ultimately Hungary, I think, also, and probably Zagreb, Croatia. We need to hold this region for a long time. I think we're going to prosecute some fairly aggressive acts in the east now and open up a real offensive here. We kind of already begun that with the capture of Bucharest. Maybe we try and engage the Austrians besieging Constanta and begin to push into Transylvania now really hard. and yeah, begin to try and conduct a march from Bucharest, really kind of towards central Hungary. Begin to roll up these fortresses. Because this is a frontier area, these areas are well fortified, so they'll have to be assaulted in kind of set pieces. But we've got a core in Smyrna which can be riverine lifted. We don't need the transport, so we can just use riverine, requisition riverine transports to bring them to Spalato. Bayezid's forced to take a bit of a hit that turn. And if we move him out of Spalato, sure enough, some Austrians will move in. So we want to hold Spalato, I think. I want to deal with the right flank of his force though before we head north. It just depends how much of a clock we're on. We'll see what it looks like once these forces start drawing food and supplies from Vienna. Yeah, I mean, we're 192 national morale. We actually gained 250. From taking the objective, it scales down, so we set 192. Austria's at 5. Yeah, so the hope is that this renders their forces ineffective, but I don't know whether that will happen instantly. Can't really remember from last time, or whether it will follow the same pattern as last time, but we'll see how effective this renders their forces, I suppose. But the idea is we want to try and hold this position, get supplies to them, and begin now to systematically destroy the Austrian Empire, destroy its armies really, and begin an occupation, a long-term military occupation of the central part of the empire. I mean, long-term is in 6 months to a year really, in order to kind of position ourselves to impose a harsh peace on them. Yeah, and a lot of that's going to hinge on what happens in the next month, the next fortnight to the next month. But we'll leave it there, and I'll pick up, I think, probably in late October where we are then in the next video. So yeah, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.